With us now is the Congressman Bob Goodlatte of Virginia. He's chairman of the House Judiciary Committee and a leader in the fight against overcriminalization. He's an old-time friend and actually the congressman of my place up in Hot Springs. Bob, good to see you this morning. Thank you for being here.
Well, Pat, it's great to be with you, and I also represent your boyhood home in Lexington, Virginia, too.
Oh, are you now in charge of? Oh, that's great. Well, anyhow, they love you up there. You'll stay in forever. But let me ask you, how many how many crimes do we have in America? I mean, that are on the statute books? Do you know?
Well, I don't know how many state and local laws there are, but there are over 5,000 federal criminal laws, and we're adding about 500 a decade for the last 3 decades. So when I became chairman of the House Judiciary Committee in the last Congress, we launched a task force, a bipartisan task force, called Overcriminalization of Federal Law. And we've held nearly a dozen hearings. We've heard from some expert witnesses. We've examined this very carefully, and now we're in the process of writing several bills that will address this issue. Everything from what you mentioned, and that is these laws, the overwhelming majority of them don't require what's called mens rea, or criminal intent. So you can be doing something you think is good for your family, your employees, your customers, whatever, and find that not only have you run afoul of a federal regulatory statute, but now you're also being charged with a felony. And some people have heard the famous stories of the little girl who rescued a woodpecker from the family cat, put it in a cage to help it recover, and her mother was almost charged with violating the Migratory Bird Act, or the famous race car driver who was out driving his snowmobile and got caught in a blizzard and wound up wandering into a wilderness area. He was lost for 2 days, thankfully recovered and was safe, but then charged with operating a motor vehicle in a wilderness area. So these kinds of problems are pervasive in our society today, as you note, and we think that we should add a requirement of showing criminal intent before you can be charged with these crimes and convicted of them.
Can you backdate some of these things? I know that the laws are on the books, and I'm sure looking at things going forward, but can you really do a major overhaul and make those requirements on the entire federal statute?
We should, and that's a major undertaking, but in the meantime, what we'd like to do is to put the mens rea requirement into the law. So the prosecutor would be required to show that you had criminal intent, that you knew or should have known that you were violating the law when you committed whatever act it is they say is a crime. And we're also going to look at this from other standpoints as well. For example, we have now over 2 million people in our prisons, about 10% of those in federal prisons, and we think that prison reform is badly needed because 90% of those people are going to be released back into society at some point, and we want to make sure they're ready for that. We think we waste a lot of resources on things that are not helping to reduce recidivism. In other words, reduce the chance that somebody's going to wind up back in prison after they're released back into society.
I was on a presidential task force some time ago, and one of the recommendations we made in terms of victims' rights was to make sure that there was some kind of rehab, and that the people who were charged would actually see the victim that they had hurt and have some type of rehabilitation in regard to understanding what they had done. Can we put something like that into the code?
You bet. In fact, our research has shown that there are some existing federal programs in prison that do work, that do lower the recidivism rate, and one of those is drug rehabilitation. After all, if you've got somebody in confinement, you've got the perfect circumstance to work with them on a daily, hourly basis on overcoming this horrific addiction, so that when they're released, the likelihood that they'll go back into drug addiction, drug use, and then follow that with criminal behavior, often to fund the drug use, is certainly a part of what we should be doing a lot more of.
Uh, yeah, I understand a number of these federal agencies on their own have had criminal sanctions attached to certain of their programs. The president could actually, by an executive order, cancel all those things, all the criminal penalties, couldn't he, or not? It doesn't. It's not a congressional statute.
Well, I would argue that, well, first of all, the 5,000 laws I'm talking about are federal statutes passed by Congress, House and Senate, signed into law by the president. And so I would argue very strongly the president does not have the authority to overturn those by executive order. He may think he does based upon what he's done, for example, with his administrative immigration amnesty. But in this area, this is the Congress's responsibility. We should act, but we should give the president and the Bureau of Prisons and others in the Justice Department the tools they need to reduce this overcriminalization of our law, and to make sure that those who are appropriately prosecuted and imprisoned, and I definitely believe there are people who commit crimes that need to be in prison, that when they're in prison, we're spending more of the attention on not having them socialize with other criminals, but rather getting the kind of rehabilitation they need that will result in their being less likely to commit crimes when they come out, and be more prepared to take a job and be a part of society.
Can you get bipartisan support to get a majority to get this thing through the House and Senate?
I believe we can. In fact, we've worked very closely with Democrats on the Judiciary Committee, and I think we'll find the same response in the wider House of Representatives, and I hope in the Senate as well. Bobby Scott, Democratic congressman from your part of Virginia, who served on the Judiciary Committee until this Congress, when he became the ranking member of another committee and had to give up his judiciary assignment, has worked very closely with us on this, and I know he will continue to do that.
What time frame could the American people be looking at? Are we talking about years, months? What can happen in what length of time?
I'm hoping that we will get several good bills first introduced in the next few weeks, and then taken up by the committee and passed through the House, and we'll send them over to the Senate, I'm hoping this year. And then we'll see what the Senate does, but people should also express their concerns to their senators if they are concerned about this problem of overcriminalization of our federal laws, and that every time you take a step, as you described it at the beginning of our conversation, you're at risk of somebody claiming that you've broken some law, and that you should be punished not just under our massive regulations, which, by the way, also need to be reformed, but also now charged with being a criminal. We need to look at this very carefully, because I think we've gone too far in that direction. Well,
I think the American people support you. I know we certainly do. And thank you very much for the service you're running to our country.
Thank you, Pat.
Bob Goodlatte, a dear friend for many years and a marvelous congressman.